Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics. So called because Waly Gisnep is what Walt Disney's signature really looks like, and we're going through every single one of the so-called Disney animated classics to find out which ones are really worthy of being called an animated classic. Joining me today is Liam. Liam, what are we looking at today?
Today, Ben, we're going to be looking at Fantasia, the third animated feature released by Disney. A little bit different, this one. Overall, what are your thoughts of Fantasia?
The original Fantasia I have a huge amount of nostalgia for. It was one of half a dozen Disney films that we had on VHS, and much to my parents' chagrin, I would watch on repeat, particularly the bit with the sound bar. That's my main memory of it. I know The Sorcerer's Apprentice has an enormous amount of nostalgia for it, but we can talk about that. How about you? Going back to Fantasia, what was your experience of it?
I don't think I quite had the nostalgia that you had for it, but having revisited it, I think this is actually one of my favourite projects that Disney himself worked on.
And why is that?
I think I just really like the premise of Fantasia, of taking pieces of music and asking animators, can you come up with some kind of visual interpretation of this piece of music? If you're not familiar with Fantasia, it's a series of animated segments that are all set to classical pieces of music, and they're interwoven with introductions by an MC and a live orchestra. The basic idea behind the project is that each piece of music falls into one of three categories. We either have a piece of music that has a definite plot, a piece of music that, whilst it has no specific plot, it does intend to paint a series of pictures, and finally we have abstract music that is just music for music's sake. So the idea of asking animators, with no prior background in music, listen to this and come up with some kind of visualization to it. I think the premise is fantastic, and I think for Fantasia, they have nailed that brief.
So I agree that the premise of taking a piece of music and giving it to animators to match to is incredibly interesting. Having rewatched both these films, I realise what my problem with the idea of Fantasia is. And that's that Disney is very musical anyway, and it's very animation-based anyway. And in the good Disney films, the music already matches the visuals. So Fantasia doesn't necessarily do anything additional to it. The example that stands out for me as a really clear one is if you watch the opening of The Little Mermaid, every beat of the music is matched visually by it. So when the chorus comes in the opening is the first time you see a mermaid, or I guess a merman, non-binary. And that's a very clear musical cue as to what's happening visually.
I agree that one of the strengths of Disney is building animation with music from the ground up. However, I think that by starting with a piece of music, you can allow animators to be a lot more creative and come up with a lot more abstract and weird ideas that otherwise couldn't carry a full feature.
Well, let's use that as a starting point then. So, in the original Fantasia, which of the shorts stand out for you?
That's actually really hard for me to answer because I think each of the segments have their own merits. A couple of them have got a couple of problems, but for the most part, I think each of them achieves something unique. It means there's something I like in all of them. So if we look at the ones that have a definite plot, I think these are probably the ones that people tend to remember the most. So we've got The Sorcerer's Apprentice and the Pastoral Symphony. If I did have one criticism of the Pastoral Symphony, it is that it is quite long. One problem I do have with taking a classical piece of music and setting it to animation is some of the longer pieces of music do tend to drag.
That's very much my feeling as well. I'd be interested to see, if you look at the Venn diagram of people who enjoy cartoons and people who enjoy classical music, what the overlap is, because I feel this has quite a narrow appeal in that sense.
I get that. It's very clear that Disney himself was always a fan of music. I think if you look back to the early shorts that they started with, let's say Steamboat Willie. Steamboat Willie is just Turkey in the Straw set to some animal abuse for 8 minutes. So it's clear that Walt himself was a big fan of mixing music and animation. If there is one thing that is painfully obvious from both of the Fantasia films, it's that they are not box office draws at all. I love the films and I do want them to make more films like this, However, I know that I'm probably the only person that would pay to go watch them in the cinema.
I think there are two substantial takeaways for the Disney oeuvre that come from Fantasia. I think one of them's a positive and one of them's a negative. I think the positive that comes away from Fantasia is this focus on songs and music being an event, an extravagance. We're only the third animated classic in, but if you look at the songs from Pinocchio and Snow White, of which there are several, it's literally just the characters singing. There's not any additional flourishes there. They don't change the animation style. Everything is as it was before. It's the characters literally singing and dancing to those songs. Whereas after Fantasia, things like Pink Elephants in Dumbo and even Little April Showers in Bambi, they have a visual element to them that extends beyond the normal scope of the rest of the film. I think the bad thing that Fantasia sets up is the idea that it's okay to take a bunch of shorts, package them together and say, that's a film, that's your lot, which is something bad that happens in a couple of years' time.
I think that Fantasia manages to just avoid that by treating itself as more of an event. I think that's really helped by the MC of this. I think his name is Deems Taylor. And by having an MC to guide us through the experience, it does put Fantasia more in line with going to watch live music than going to watch a film. Walt Disney himself sort of saw Fantasia as this new type of entertainment that didn't exist before this, and he was hoping it would sort of take off to be its own thing. And I think that in much of the same way that people go to see live music be performed, I can envision a world that came about because of this, that involves live music performance accompanied by visual animation. And I think that's what Walt Disney was going for, but by having it in cinemas, you took away the live orchestra and it sort of made it more accessible to a wider audience. So on the subject of the MC, there's a bit in Fantasia which I think is my favourite part of the whole film, and I'm not entirely sure what they were going for. During one of the interludes, one of the members of the orchestra just knocks over all of their bells, and it just hard cuts to this musician struggling, trying to put their instrument back together. And then it cuts back to the MC, who just carries on as normal. And I don't know, was that an intentional joke, or was it something they just didn't cut out of the film?
All I can assume is that it was unintentional, but the conductor didn't like that member of the band. And was like, hey, if you're not ready, that's not my problem. It could even have been sabotage for all we know.
So going back to how I think it's supposed to compete more with live music than a feature film, maybe it's just trying to add to the realism by leaving it in, but it just feels like sloppy filmmaking. A big part of why I really like these is because I really love non-verbal storytelling, and I think whilst the features manage to mix music and visual really well, it's only really in Fantasia that we see that non-verbal storytelling for a long time. And some of the segments within Fantasia, I think to this day, are some of the best examples of non-verbal storytelling. Let's look at the most famous short to come from this, The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
This has a very clear story. There's a sorcerer, he's got an apprentice, but he didn't see that coming. The apprentice is Mickey Mouse. Apparently this was made specifically because Mickey Mouse was waning in popularity. Mickey Mouse is very much the Ronald McDonald of the world of Disney in that he's the mascot, but no one really likes him.
In the world of animation, I always sort of viewed Mickey Mouse as a bit of a square. He always felt very boring compared to, like your Bugs Bunnies.
He certainly doesn't have any sort of attitude or sass. I can't imagine him dropping a wise one-liner. Mickey is the apprentice. The sorcerer goes to bed. Mickey can't be bothered to do his work, so he casts a spell, gets a magic mop. That goes awry, so Mickey goes to what I can only assume is his go-to when he's got a problem, which is get an axe and chop it to pieces. I've not seen Pluto in a while.
It's surprisingly violent, and although it in itself has never traumatized me, the homage that Itchy and Scratchy does to it, in which Itchy is horrifically chopped up and then becomes a fine powder and goes inside Scratchy and starts chopping him up from the inside, that is terrifying.
More terrifying than disembodied brooms that just work relentlessly. I think there's something really nihilistic and creepy about when the whole place is flooded and the brooms are still chucking buckets of water into... They're already underwater. Like, I don't know why. It just freaks me out. Maybe that's why I'm scared of brooms. In the same way Monstro made me scared of the sea, The Sorcerer's Apprentice made me scared of any kind of cleaning.
I'm more scared of Yen Sid, who is the most terrifying looking Disney character for a very long time.
Is that the name of the sorcerer?
Yeah, the sorcerer is called Yen Sid because it's Disney backwards.
Yen Sid, then, is a very stern figure who, after Mickey messes everything up, he comes in and, with a wave of his hand, he puts it all back together. And he gives Mickey this look of, you absolute tool. But I don't think he's in any place to judge anyone, given he's a grown man who wears a pointy hat with stars on.
I'm also not entirely sure how exactly Mickey is his apprentice, because he doesn't seem to be teaching him magic. He seems to be showing off magic in front of him, but otherwise he just seems to have this strange mouse boy living with him to do the dishes or something.
He has the same approach to teaching Mickey magic as my dad does to using power tools, which is, if you need it doing, I'll do it. Well, can't you just teach me? No, you can't be trusted. I'll do it.
Following The Sorcerer's Apprentice, actually, we have what I think might be... Well, it's definitely Disney's first example of mixing live action with animation, where Mickey comes up to the conductor to shake his hand, and it's all done in silhouettes, and as a result, it looks fantastic even today.
I completely agree, and rewatching Fantasia 2000... So, just on a side note, they mentioned in Fantasia 2000 that one of the ideas with Fantasia is it was ever evolving, so every time you saw it, there were some old shorts in it and some new shorts, and as part of that, they used The Sorcerer's Apprentice in its original entirety during Fantasia 2000. Now, for a film that's 73 minutes long, that's a bit cheap. But also, they show the bit at the end where Mickey goes and shakes hands with the conductor, and then they have another bit where Mickey meets the MC for Fantasia 2000. And despite the fact Fantasia 2000 was made 60 years later, it looks worse. So it's 20 years after Who Framed Roger Rabbit, god damn it.
I'll also add that in that transition, because we've changed voice actors, Mickey sounds completely different.
That's a very good point, because presumably the original is Walt?
The original is Walt Disney, and despite him being the original, I'm now so used to what is now modern-day Mickey Mouse that I hear Walt Disney and I'm like, that's just someone doing a rubbish Mickey Mouse impression. Another interesting point about seeing The Sorcerer's Apprentice contrasted in Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 is it really hammers home that the Mickey Mouse that we had in Fantasia was redesigned specifically for the film. And that is the design that has persisted to this day. For over 75 years, we've had the design. I think the animator was Fred Moore.
Okay, Liam, we've talked about The Sorcerer's Apprentice and we've touched on some of the others. Rather than going into them all in detail, I'm just going to shoot through them and I want you to give me your one-line review of them. Is that okay?
Got you.
Okay. I'm going to tell you what the piece of music is, and then I'm going to describe it to you because I'm not very good on classical music. So the opening is Toccata and Fugue in D minor, which is just a load of shapes.
It's fantastically abstract, and I think it is the best opening for the film. It sort of settles you down to say, look, what you're about to watch is weird.
I think that's fair. Next up is the Nutcracker Suite, which starts with the fairies changing from summer to autumn to winter, and then we have the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy and a whole bunch of stuff and flowers dancing.
The Russian dance from the Nutcracker Suite is probably my favourite piece of classical music, and I think it began with this, so it's hard to be a bit more objective, but I love the interpretation with the flowers.
The Rite of Spring, which shows the origin of life on Earth, the evolution of life, and then the death of the dinosaurs.
It starts out strong, but as I've learnt recently, dinosaurs are incredibly boring.
I don't know, there's a part of me that wants to do a mashup of parts of this sequence with the Jurassic Park score. Just when they're starving to death. Next we have Meet the Soundtrack, which is a line that is drawn.
I love this piece. I think it might be my favourite of the whole film. It could only exist in this format, and I think it alone justifies Fantasia's existence for me.
As a child, I think I struggled to understand that when they introduced the soundtrack, that wasn't a conscious being. I watched this film when I was very young, and I didn't really understand the concept that there were fictional characters. The Pastoral Symphony by Beethoven is the centaurs and centaurettes, and what I think is Bacchus just harassing a number of women.
Yes, I think this is probably the most interesting visually, and we see a lot of the visual style recycled and improved for Hercules later on.
The continuation of the Zeus design is a really nice touch in Hercules.
It's a great segment. It's a great piece of music. It is probably just a little bit too long, though.
Dance of the Hours, which is...
Is this the Hippo Ballet?
It's the Hippo Ballet. I was trying to think of another way of describing it. But Hippo Ballet is the most efficient way of doing so.
It's great. It's a hippo ballet. What's not to love?
I mean, I'd say the length of it and the weirdness of it are both things not to love. I don't really understand what it's about.
It's about a hippo doing ballet.
Well, I guess. And then lastly, we have Night on Bald Mountain, which is followed by Ave Maria.
I do like these segments. I prefer Night on Bald Mountain, but I understand that they are paired together. I think they make for a really good finale. I do think Ave Maria goes on a little bit too long, but given that you've just sat through 2 hours of music, I understand why it is in the current form. I like these segments. One thing I really enjoy is that the town at the bottom of the mountain appears to be Pinocchio's town.
I'd never noticed that, but I think you're right. That just makes it even more nightmarish than it was already.
But it would explain why Geppetto sleeps with a gun under his pillow.
Fantasia for me, and it's true of Fantasia 2000 as well, which we'll come on to in a moment. My experience of it is, and I think I summarise this for a lot of people, is there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. When I'm watching it, I go, I like the idea of combining music and animation in this way. The music is well performed. I like the animation. I think it's creative. But it's never going to replace a full-on Disney narrative. Narratives are intrinsically easier to engage with. Even if it's something horrifying like Pinocchio or something very simplistic like Snow White, it's intrinsically more watchable. For me at least, but I have a very short attention span.
I think that I fall more into the same camp as Walt Disney, where I would like to see something like this revisited regularly, because I love the premise so much. I think making it 2 hours is a bit much, but letting animators sort of cut their teeth on a project where you're just given a piece of music. You don't have to write a piece of music to go with your story. You are just given this piece of music and told, do what you want with this. I think that is a really special project. And as I said, I think it's a really good way for animators to kind of cut their teeth. So when, as part of this, we were revisiting Fantasia 2000, I was really excited to see, did they nail that brief? And I've got to admit, despite loving Fantasia so much, I'm not a big fan of Fantasia 2000. I think the reinvention of it lost a lot of what worked about it.
What is it about Fantasia 2000 that you don't think works? I know what I think, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
I think that by trying to keep it as an event, they put a bit too much focus on the live action segments, and straight out of the gate, I don't want celebrity intermissions between the animated segments. I think stick to the orchestra and a single MC, and then the focus can be on the animated segments.
In my notes, I've just written, Steve Martin, no.
When watching this for the first time and I saw Steve Martin, I was worried that he was going to be the MC, and I immediately thought, this is a terrible idea. And then the next segment is introduced by Bette Midler, and I was like, oh no, this is an even worse idea.
There doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason to it, because James Earl Jones shows up and you go, of course, the voice would move faster. And then Penn and Teller show up and you're like, what's their connection to Disney?
It feels like a variety program, and like a variety program, it just lacks any charm.
Are there any pieces that stand out for you as particularly charming?
Oh, I will say that's mostly in regards to the intermissions. I think the pieces of animation themselves are actually very good. Some of them even better than any of the stuff in the original Fantasia. I really like Rhapsody in Blue, which is this nice little jazz number set in New York, and it basically tells the audience, hey, this doesn't have to be classical music, and I'd love to see more of that. I'd like to see animators taking instrumentals from different genres and seeing what they can do with them.
This comes back to what I was saying earlier when I made the Little Mermaid comparison, is that that's kind of what Disney do now anyway. Obviously they put it through a Broadway/pop mangler, but you do get different musical styles. Hercules has that gospel thing going on. Obviously Broadway was a huge influence on the 80s and 90s in Disney. You know, Zootropolis had a Shakira song. On the subject of Rhapsody in Blue, very briefly, It's a lot of very short stories about different people in New York and how they're getting by. I assume it's meant to be New York, certainly a big city, trying to get by in life, and they've all got different problems. One of them is a guy who can't get a job, and at the end of it, he gets the night shift doing riveting, which A, you shouldn't be doing building work at night, it's going to disturb everyone's sleep. But B, he just does it in a full suit and tie, and I was like, yeah, fair play, mate. Good on you.
Rhapsody in Blue actually inspired what I'd like to see from Disney going forward, because I do think there is potential in this premise. I want to see Disney continuing to animate existing pieces of music, but rather than putting them together as a full feature, I want to see them attach them to other features as shorts beforehand.
That was where I was going to go with this. Is I think the thing we've learned with Fantasia 2000 is that is such a better model. Paperman's fantastic. Feast I really like, which is it's about a fat little dog. Even, is it called Get Your Horse? The one that it's old-fashioned style cartoons, but then they play with different types of animation in it. All that is so much more fun than a lot of these. And it's not that there's anything intrinsically wrong with these shorts. As I say, they're very well done, but they're good as a palate cleanser to a main feature rather than just a series of them. It's not even a problem with the shorts. If you sit down and try and watch all Pixar shorts in one go, which are all fantastic except for the Cars ones, if you try and watch them all in one go, it's a slog because it's not how these things are meant to be watched. They're meant to be watched in a vacuum, not in a marathon.
I've got a lot of love for the Disney shorts, as well as the Pixar shorts, though I do think that the shorts that Disney have made in recent years, for the most part, just beat out those Pixar ones.
I'd agree with that.
However, we're not seeing that many of them, and I get that they're intense projects. They're often people's passion projects, with one individual overseeing the music, the animation, the story, and so I imagine it's quite resource intensive. What I don't like are all of the spin-off shorts. So you mentioned Cars. Cars has got about 12 shorts all focused on the character of Mater, and they seem to be the testing ground for animators. What I want to see is take off the pressure of the story, take off the pressure of the music, just focus on the animation, give your new animators an existing piece of music and let them run wild with it, and then release those in front of feature films.
Yeah, Disney. Listen up. But genuinely, one of the things is, at the start of Fantasia 2000, they come out and introduce it and say, Fantasia was made 60 odd years ago. Originally the idea that Walt Disney wanted was that we'll do a new version of it regularly, but that didn't really pan out. They just kind of brush over the fact that people didn't really like it. And then they say, anyway, we're going to do it again now. They literally acknowledge in the opening of Fantasia 2000 that the format doesn't really work, and then they just proceed to do it again.
So if you're listening, Disney executives, we're right, you're wrong. Please stop making Frozen shorts and give your animators just a nice piece of music and tell them to come up with something that you can throw in front of Frozen 3.
More Paperman, please. I love Paperman. It looks great, the animation's completely distinct, and there's no dialogue in it. It's amazing.
Paperman might be my favourite thing that Disney has ever released, and I think it's going to stay that way for a very long time.
Other than Ralph Breaks the Internet, obviously.
As always, before we go, there's just time to pick who we believe is the sexiest character in Fantasia and Fantasia 2000. So, Ben, throughout all of the shorts, who is the sexiest character?
Am I doing one for each film or one across both of them?
Let's do one for each.
Okay.
So starting with Fantasia.
So for Fantasia, I'm going to go with one of the ice fairies.
Are you not going for the second sexy fish?
Oh, there is another sexy fish. I just want to be clear, by the way, when we talk sexiest character, we're not basing this on our sexual preferences, gender, or species of the character. It's purely what we think is objectively the sexiest. And I'm going to stick with my original answer and go for the ice fairies in that one. And in Fantasia 2000, I'm going to go for the nightmarish Jack-in-the-Box.
Oh yeah, there's the horrible early CG Tin Soldier. I think for Fantasia, I'm going to have to go for Zeus. And for Fantasia 2000, and this one is entirely personal, it's Daisy Duck. I've always had a thing for Daisy Duck.
And I think this is her only animated classics appearance, if I'm correct.
Correct, which means it is the only time she will appear on this list.
When at the end of all this we collate who is the sexiest of the sexiest, is she going to be number one?
She's going to be number one.
Fantastic.
And speaking of lists, that leaves just one thing to decide. Do either of Fantasia or Fantasia 2000 make it onto the list of Waly Gisnep animated classics?
I suspect this is the first choice that we are going to disagree on. I would rate these films as broadly of equivalent quality, and although they have individually nice moments, as a complete package, I don't think they meet that bar. So for me, both Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 don't make it on the list and go in the bin of films that are broadly fine.
You've broken my heart a little bit here, Ben. I completely agree regarding Fantasia 2000. It doesn't even deserve to be mentioned in the same space as Waly Gisnep's animated classics. But I really like Fantasia, and I would want to put it on the list. So we're at a little bit of an impasse here. You want to put it in the bin. I want to put it on the list. Can we say write it on the back of the list?
I'm willing to compromise on some sort of reserve list and then allow other people to decide once and for all which one of us is right.
I can live with that. So it's not made the lofty heights of Waly Gisnep's animated classics, but it's there, waiting in the wings for some saviour to come and agree with me and tell Ben it deserves a spot.
I'm not going to use any such aggrandising language. I'm going to simply say, next time you've got 2 hours to burn, have a watch. I rest my case. Well, that was our journey through the 2 Fantasia films. I'd like to say we're done with shorts and we're not going to have to try and form some kind of structure around them, but oh boy are we not done with shorts. But we've got another couple of genuine Stone Cold classics coming up. What are we looking at next time, Liam?
Next time we're going to be looking at Dumbo, and I've got to say this is one I'm really looking forward to rewatching, so give it a look and we'll see you back next time.
Bye!